Good day, good evening, good afternoon, listeners and viewers. Thank you so very much for joining me on another episode of All Things Faith Walk. This is where we talk about the Word of God in practical terms, in meaningful ways, where you and I can take them and walk them out in our daily lives. So thank you very much for joining me one more time to talk about all things pertaining to our walk with the Lord. Today, I have a guest with me. Her name is Stephanie Ferger, and we're going to have a discussion that can benefit us in advancing our walk with the Lord as well as our personal lives, how we can achieve our goals, how we can walk in our purpose, how we can live a fulfilling life. So Stephanie is the owner and chief strategist of the Empower, EM, uppercase POWER PR Group. She is passionate about empowering nonfiction writers, authors, and entrepreneurs with laser focused marketing strategies and tactics to help them write books that sell, promote their books, and build a meaningful business from a message that is empowering. And those of us who write books know that that is very well needed. I often say writing the book is the easy part. Marketing the book and getting it in the hands of the readers, that's where the work really starts. So this mission that Stephanie's on is very well needed. Many of us authors could definitely use this. So as an author herself, she's written 4 books, including her 2 newest books, Make Your Author Impact, EMPACT, and Emergence, Living Lessons from the Soil. We're going to be talking about living lessons from the soil today. She merges her love for writing books and her skill set in marketing them to help non-fiction writers like myself make their author impact. To learn more about Stephanie, you can find her at EMPOWERPRgroup.com. And she will be repeating this information a couple of times before we finish the discussion. So that's the beautiful Stephanie we have today. And we're just going to jump in and talk about some stuff about writing, and as well as particularly about lessons from the soil. The topic of this book is really intriguing. It's an intriguing book, but I want to go back a little bit. Why not just do marketing? Why do you do marketing and writing? Why do you marry the two?
Oh, that's a beautiful question. And, I'm excited that I can talk God here because he's
Amen.
interwoven in all of the tapestry. If it were for me, I would not be doing this. I had other plans, and I was moving up the corporate ladder, doing marketing and PR and communications for a large national nonprofit, was outwardly loving what I did, inwardly not so much. I was having moments where I thought, if this is what success looks like, I don't know that I want it, right? Like it sounds great on paper, it looks good, but on the inside, I wasn't as fulfilled as I was hopeful for. And so behind the scenes, God was having a conversation with me about the importance of writing. And that was how him and I were talking for years. But it was a corporate layoff that I was, and inevitably it's when we are pushed in and propelled into change, right? The uncomfortable. I've come to love being uncomfortable, and that's weird for me to say, but I actually do, because that's where beautiful things are really happening. That's where I get innovative and creative. But when my first book came out, it had nothing to do about marketing. It had everything to do about God and perspective in life. And then all these authors started coming out of the woodwork saying, how do you market a book? And I'm like, you know how to do that? And they're like, I don't know how to do that.
Oh, no.
So no, right. But in hindsight, I can look back and see that God was forging this path together. So
beautiful.
like 15 plus years in the industry outside of writing. But when I published my first book, I now realized I needed that background of understanding, especially working a nonprofit, understanding the value of the dollar, how to really focus on the right movements without just investing a ton of money, like really doing the right things that evoke change. And then when my book came out, I realized, okay, I get it now. I get it now, because it's one thing to move an organization. It's another thing to propel a message. And that's what we do as authors. We have a message the world needs.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that makes absolute sense. And then your background with marketing, it just fit right in.
It did.
Because if you just write, a lot of us writers, in fact, I wish I could just write and don't have to worry about the marketing part.
Yeah.
But you have both skills, one on the right, one on the left, or both on the right and the left, but you are ambidextrous in this in this capacity. And that's a blessing. And then you're using it to help others advance the work. Because what you're very right. When we write, we're conveying a message.
Mm.
Yeah. It's similar
Yeah,
to standing in a pulpit, but we're writing. Yeah.
it is, you know, and
Mhm.
I had a pastor once make a comment about, you know, our charge as people, and it hit me really, really intimately. And I realized, I think this is why I do what I do. I believe that books can build bridges and break down walls. And in
Mhm.
a world where we are really good at laying cement and bricks to create really strong walls to separate and divide us, what I have found is that books that, and specifically nonfiction, although I think fiction does it too, but they allow people to, in a very vulnerable, intimate, at their time way, be able to sit with something that someone else poured their heart and soul into.
Mhm. Mhm.
And weirdly enough, as they're sitting with it, and it feels very intimate, right? Like it's somebody's
Mhm.
words on paper at a time when
Mhm.
you're open to hearing it and not have
Mhm.
your defenses up, you find that the mortar of the brick can start to break. And that's what
Right.
you better learn from other people. And I think we become a better person, a better collective people when we hear stories of others, because it
Absolutely.
allows us to understand that there's not one way from point A to point B, there's many, and that all of our stories matter, all of us matter.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm not a architect by trade, but I feel like I'm in the business of bridge building.
Building. Yes. Yes. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So I like because this is true. I like the way you put it, that the nonfiction books, I'm a nonfiction writer. I can't imagine myself writing a fiction, but
Me neither.
yeah, I'm a nonfiction writer. So the way you put it, it's as if the reader is sitting down and now the writer is pouring into them, ministering to them. And the type of information that nonfiction materials cover is very different from fiction. It's very different. And readers, several readers, people who have read my books, people who know me, I could just hear your voice in my
Yeah.
head when I'm reading it. I could just hear your voice. So then
Awesome.
I know that, you know what, you've gotten the real thing.
Yeah.
You've gotten me on paper.
Yes.
If you heard somebody else's voices, or if I didn't come over in the pages because you've heard me talk in minister, so now I know you've gotten the real deal. So that I like the way you put that.
Thank you. Well, and
Yes.
to add a layer, even though I'm a nonfiction author too, there is a fiction author that I absolutely love, Jodi Picoult. She writes beautiful fiction, but she takes timely topics that are controversial,
Mhm.
and she researches all the angles, and she pulls you in almost for escapism, but teaches you something in the process.
There you
And
go.
she is one of the only authors, if not the only author outside of authors I personally had the chance to work with, that after I finished one of her books, I actually emailed her. So
Mhm.
I picked up a copy of her book because it was because I love her. And I was at, like, you know, a used bookstore. I'm like, anything Jodi makes me happy. And the cover looked like the cover of my first book. So I picked it up, thought life would be lovely, and I start reading it. And it was on a topic that I was not open to hearing more about. It's actually about on abortion. I have opinions, personal opinions on that stance. Not that I'm a closed-minded human, but I just have a stance on how
Mhm.
I look at it. And
Mhm.
so I opened it and I had a moment. I'm like, Jodi, what did you do to me? I'm not ready for this, right? But what I loved when I finished the book is, and this is what I wrote to her, is I said, I came to the story with an opinion. I left with the same opinion. However,
Mhm.
in the process, she opened my eyes to varied perspectives. She helped me care about the person, the
Mhm.
individual element, and walk away a better human because of it. And she wrote back, and it was a lot. She's like, she's got such a fun little punch to her. And she wrote back something like, you know, well, it's bloody time or something funny. It was hilarious, you know, like, but she actually was the one that responded and made my heart full. And it also was proof to me that I may have come to a conversation with others with these preconceived notions, even though I feel like I'm a very open and inclusive human.
Mhm.
without reading this story, I may have been more closed-minded.
Mm-hmm,
And I think
mm-hmm.
that's what books can do, right? Like
Yes, yes, definitely,
it
definitely.
opens us, even if you
Mm-hmm,
still feel a certain way,
mm-hmm.
our uniqueness is what makes the world tick.
Absolutely. And
And
and my point is not to definitely discount nonfiction. Nonfictions talk to many, many, many
I
people.
love
Many
nonfiction.
people read them.
Yeah.
That's what I'm sorry, fictions.
Oh yeah, yes.
Fictions talk to many people. Many people love them. That's why they're written. So it's not to um, downgrade fictions at all. We're all called to different assignments. It's up to us
Absolutely.
to stay with the assignment to which we are called.
Yes,
So
yes. I agree.
we're going to talk about your nonfiction today. One of your nonfictions, Living Lessons from the Soil. Why
Mm.
that topic?
So weirdly enough, when my first book came out, my husband had like almost like this weird vision. We were sitting down at watching, I don't know, I don't even know that Netflix was around then, but Netflix, something on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And he turned TV off and he looked at me and he's like, oh my gosh, you need to take this one area that you kind of scratch a little bit in book number one, and I see you really using it to expand. And it was all around gardening and plants and the trajectory of a plant's growth and its parallel to our own lives. And I said, okay, whatever. And I started to noodle on it. And of course, in God's timing, always, when the time was right for the story to come out, I couldn't hold it back. So I come from a background of gardening and farming. Although if you were to know me a couple of years ago and learn that my husband and I would sell our home and move to a farm, you would go, Stephanie, like who hates bugs? I'm like, yep, Stephanie who hates bugs is on a 25-acre farm. But I was raised going to my grandparents' farm on the weekends. They had a weekend farm not far from us, and my dad and myself and my cousin and my grandma and grandpa, like we would pour in all the sweat equity and have a treehouse and have a garden and deal with cows and the simplicity of life without technology, no cell service or phone service there. It was really interesting. And that was a big part of my upbringing. But what I wouldn't know until, 20 years later is that I could look back and see that while we were planting seeds in the soil, my grandparents were planting seeds in me to see life through a different lens. My other grandmother that I talk about in my newest book, Emergence, is somebody who was on a very limited income. Her apartment was itty bitty, and she had a love for house plants, and she had two windows I don't even know you could even look out of because they were covered with plants all around them. And I learned from her too the value of what a plant is and the life behind it. And so it was really interesting how this book came to be, because my husband and I started gardening and we have plants all through our home. And the first year after COVID, I was homeschooling, and just so happened the science curriculum we picked was on life, and the life started in discussing plant life. And I had this really like moment of awakening. And I know that you probably understand that as a nonfiction Christian writer, where I was like, oh my gosh, God, I get it now. And what I realized it was happening in front of me was the trajectory of a plant's growth from seed to pollination, and how every step along the way were beautiful parallels of our own lives. And people would ask me questions like, Stephanie, why do you get like the most delicious tomatoes? And just instinctively, I would say, oh, because in the downtimes I cover the garden with manure. And it hit me. I'm like, oh my gosh, well, the downtimes of our own life, when we feel like we're going through hardships, it's the manure, and I'm saying that kindly, but it's the really icky situations that are stinky we want to run from, that are actually nourishing us and preparing us. So this Emergence, the Living Lessons from the Soil, was actually a really beautiful, probably my favorite book to write to date, that taught me and reminded me about the importance of, sometimes we're the planter, sometimes we're the sower, sometimes we're the one that harvests, sometimes we're the one that fertilizes, but along the way, what you really do, not to be cliche, you reap what you sow. And sometimes that means that it's our hardships that are preparing us to have the strongest root system, to give us stability, to help us grow through challenge and
Mhm.
everything in between. So the book highlights that, of course, through real stories of experiences I've gone through, hardships and beautiful moments, things
Mhm.
I've seen in other people, and all has the end goal of helping a reader see themselves in the interconnectedness of the world around us.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know?
So you're saying the the idea of the book came from part of your upbringing and
Mhm.
later on your own personal experience, like the science lesson you were
Mhm.
just brought it together. Is that
Yeah, I
what I'm
mean,
hearing?
yes. Yeah, and I think this is just proof that sometimes what happens in your life you don't realize is really the
Why
foundation.
it's happening, and then later
Yes.
on you see the connection. Okay, okay,
Yes,
all
yes.
right,
I mean,
yeah.
I would sit in my garden when my husband and I bought our first home, and I would have had a really cruddy day. And,
Mm-hmm.
something was going on at work or what have you. And I would just sit out there and I was weeding and whatever. And I remember one day looking next to me, and a squash plant, of all things, had found a way to not be constrained in the borders of our garden that we had created so the bunnies wouldn't get in. It had trellised up, and it had held on along the way, and it was weaving out. And I looked at it and I remember thinking, if a squash plant wants to grow that bad and it will do anything, like,
Mm-hmm.
why do I let the
Mm-hmm.
the borders that other people put on
Yep,
me
yep, yep,
constrain
yep.
me?
So let me ask this.
Yeah.
I hear um grandparents, I hear even your experience. How does your faith walk contribute to the
Mm,
composition of this book?
mhm,
How is it folded in there? How
mhm.
does it contribute to
Yeah.
the book?
Yeah, well, so my grandparents were God-loving, God-fearing people. And I look back, interesting, they both had different Christian denominations that I was raised in, but they taught me so much about seeing and pausing and living in the moment. And what
Mm-hmm.
I would notice when I was out, when anytime I go out into the garden or I work on my little house plants, what I notice there is God is always in our midst, no matter how quiet it might seem, that He is doing stuff to grow and to grow us. I'll use a real time example. This is actually not a story shared in the book, although I wish it was, because it was a really good one that's happening right now. I just recently bought a prayer plant. Are you familiar with the prayer plants?
No,
Oh,
no.
they're amazing. You need to get one. They are a type of plant that can sense sunlight. And when the sun is up, the leaves are open. And at
Oh,
night, the leaves close like a prayer, like prayer hands,
wow.
and it
My
opens
prayer
over.
hands. Wow. Wow.
It's a gorgeous, one of my favorite plants on the planet.
Oh.
Well, I bought one probably not long after my book came out, because I tend to kill those plants, unfortunately. And I was thinking the other day, I'm like, maybe God, you're telling me that I need to spend more time in prayer. But recently I looked at this prayer plant and it was imploding. Like the
Mhm,
leaves were curling, things were
mhm,
struggling, it was not doing well. And I had a oh no moment. And so I started doing my research and I started moving it around the house, and I found its spot, and I learned the importance of spraying water on the leaves daily, like a couple times a day, that the leaves like that. And so then I learned, we'll see how that goes. And okay, maybe that'll work. Well, if not, I need to soak the roots. There were these different steps. And I am grateful and happy to say that as of today, knock on wood, the prayer plant is thriving
doing
and
good. All
happy.
right. All
But
right.
but this is where God is in all of it. And this is what you can read with God in the book, but really just in how I see life, is that um all of that was a lovely parallel and a reminder of the Holy Spirit working in the moments
Mhm,
and
mhm,
reminding me, like, again, it was one of those profound moments the other day. I was like, okay, God, out of all the plants that I have, and we have probably 20 or 30 or 50 in this house, why was that one the one that looked like it was struggling the most? And then I realized that my prayer time with him has become diminished. Like, I need to get back to it. And so the methodical moments that I have spending time working on this plant is has personally reminded me of the importance of not just taking time to spend deep prayer with him, but caring about it to the level that I cared about these leaves unraveling, right? Like it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's
yeah,
like,
yeah, definitely. Isn't it beautiful how he can talk to us in the most unique and relatable ways?
Absolutely.
The thing that means so much to us is what he can use to convey his heart to our heart. That's the kind of God we serve. And a whole litany of messages is in that experience right there. So see, this is why I don't have plants like prayer plants, because I have to spray them every day, and that's just too much work. It's too much work.
Well, okay, but hold on. To align it with, if you have a good prayer life and you remain consistent to it, you don't have to do that. If I would have been taking care of this plant from the beginning, they say it's one of the easiest plants to care for.
So that was to get it back on track. You needed to do that. Okay, that was treatment to get it back on track. I get it.
Treatment.
I get it.
Yeah.
Get it. And so it is with our prayer lives, listeners. When the leaves are wiltering, if there's that's the word, withering. When the roots are drying up, we need to water our prayer lives with more time spent with the Father. And this is not in congregate prayer sessions, but in our secret place, one-on-one with the lover of our souls. All right, so you've talked quite a bit about the book already. But if you were in an elevator, that would be way too long to get the people on the elevator to say, I want the book, because they would reach their floor and you wouldn't hit the punchline. I want you to you are on an elevator and you have 3 or 4 people on the elevator. You're at a conference, you did you have a booth or something, and I saw you across the hall, and what's your book about? And you want them to hear your elevator speech, and after go back to their room to freshen up, they come straight back to your table to buy your books. What do you tell them?
Well, I would say, and I believe this, that learning happens anywhere. For me, the greatest teacher here on this planet is the soil. And I have found, when I look at the growth of a plant, that many of us think that its goal is to bloom. But what I have found is it's really, the goal is to pollinate. And as people, we are charged with the seeds that have been planted in us, to not hold them just for our own beauty and our own goals and our own sake, but to use it as a way to pollinate the lives of others. And my intention with the book Emergence would be to inspire all of us to see the opportunities for us to pollinate every single person we get to meet.
Nice.
Thank you.
Okay. So, I want you to tell the readers where they can get this great book, because this is a book we want them to get. Where can they get this book?
Absolutely. Well, the book is on Amazon and other online sources that you purchase books. However, I always encourage people to go to the website, stephaniefeger.com, and the last name is F as in Frank, E-G-E-R, that we can get a direct link to get over there. And you can also see some of the other books that I've written. My first one, Color Today Pretty, is a beautiful complement to this one as well. But yep, it's available on Amazon. It became a bestseller and a hot new release came out, which was always exciting and awesome. But you know what? I'll be honest, I don't measure impact in that way. I measure impact in the lives that have been changed. And just today, I had somebody post on social a quote from the book, and it was something around the lines of, don't take silence as diminished potential. And I use that to express how, when you plant a seed and you don't see anything, it doesn't mean that things aren't happening under the soil.
I love it. We have to be patient.
Patience. Don't pray for patience, though. You know what happens.
The process is tough. Yes, definitely.
It is.
Like a farmer. A farmer plants a seed expecting a harvest, but there's things that they have to do in the process, and also they must wait in the process. And you put a seed in a dark place, a damp place, seemingly unpleasant place, but that's where life is birthed. That's the
There
beauty
was
about this topic, the word emergence. You've got to emerge from somewhere into somewhere. And there's a process in the emergence process. I want to dig a little bit in the book, but you were about to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there was a card that I found just when the book came out, and it said something like, never underestimate a seed as small as a freckle. When it's put into the soil, which is quadruple its weight, it says, I will move mountains. And it does.
And it does. It makes its way out through that soil because it persevered through it, right?
Yeah.
Didn't die
And if
there.
it can do that, explain to me why we can't.
And that's a lesson number one.
Yeah.
That's lesson number one. So the dark places, the places when it's seasons during which we're not seen, we're not heard, we feel like we're not blooming, bearing anything, that's developing stage.
It is.
Yeah. That's
it
dying
is.
and coming back to life stage.
Yeah.
That's a message right there. Right
Mm-hmm.
there that so many of us need to learn, because we want to be shining, brighting, blooming. A tree doesn't bear fruit in every season. Trees have seasons. So
Yeah,
why should we always be bearing fruit? Go ahead.
Right. Well, without its root system, which is something we like to cut off, right? Like we like to go, oh, well, I'm just going to forget this part of me, or this part of me and this experience was awful. I'm just going to cut it off. You can't do it. That doesn't mean you have to be okay with it, but you do have to accept that that was a part of you.
Use it. Because
it stabilizes you for the next storm.
Exactly. And this is what I tell people. Don't waste your pain. That dark season may be very, very painful, but your pain can become your pulpit. Don't waste your pain. Your pain gives you power to pour into people.
Yep.
Your pain gives you power to pour into people. You can't waste your pain.
No.
So I like the layout of the book, and I kind of could see where you were going. It has 6 parts. And based on the topics given to the 6 parts, the topic given to each part, I can see the process.
Yeah.
I want you to walk us through the process real quickly, because I'm gonna then pick out 1 or 2 topics and give us the punchline, as many as we can go through. Because, well, I want readers to get a taste of the book so they can see kind of what you cover and what they can get from the book. And they won't get that if we don't talk about it a little bit. So why did those 6 sections or parts have those topics?
Well, so when I was teaching life science to my kiddos, we actually dissected the growth of a plant. And when I was thinking about this book and the messages that were found in it, I didn't want it to be a cheesy book. By no means is it cheesy in the sense of the parts of a plant, but I did want to help people see themselves in the different phases. So we go from seed to roots to the breakthrough to growth to blooms to pollination. And through each of those, we use the storyline of what a plant is experiencing, whether that's a vegetable plant, which is my favorite type, or a house plant or a tree or what have you. And we look at what does that mean for if we were there. Right? Where are we currently in our life, and how can we see ourselves in each of those, not just how it impacts us, but how we can impact others based on those stages too.
Nice. The process is there. Once you get the book and you look at the topic for each part or section, you can see the picture immediately if you know anything about plants immediately. So I'm going to mention 1 or 2 subtopics in each of the 6, right? I think, let me see. You mentioned the cave. I'm going to mention the cave, the freedom, the rocks, the toolkit, the move, the verb. I think each of these is 1 subtopic, 1 chapter out of each part or section. Am I right?
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay.
I love it. And I'm pulling up the book myself so that I can
pull it up. Right. Pull it up.
Yeah.
So when you say the cave, I want for each of these, give me a takeaway or the main takeaway you want the readers to get. The cave.
So the cave is in the part 1 of the book that's focused on the seed. And while the first couple chapters in part 1 actually talk about seed dissection, literally, I wanted to make a pivot to help people realize when I talk about a seed, I don't always mean the literal one. I'm talking about the figurative one and what we do and how we place in other people. The story about the cave is actually about an experience that my dad took my daughter and my oldest son to. We live here in Kentucky, which is got a massive cave system in our right underneath our feet. And so my dad had taken my kiddos to Mammoth Cave, and in that journey, my daughter, who struggled a bit with speaking, I don't know if you've ever heard of somebody who has been so happy that she never formed muscles in her mouth to talk, but that's what happened to my daughter. And so she had to go through years of doing it. But in that process, she went traversing this underground dark cave at a very young age with my dad. And I know she was really nervous, but she came back from the trip and I said, "How was it?" And she said, "I was brave." And I got emotional because I realized years ago, I had used one of my favorite songs, which is a Sarah Bareilles song, "Brave," as kind of like an anthem. We would just sing it going down the street together. And I reflected on that in this experience with this perspective of when you're in that darkness, you just have to be brave to get through it. But I had laid that seed in her before she ever got there. Like what we had done, just in joyous car rides, singing a silly song together. She was like, "I was brave. You taught me that."
And there is the upshoot of that seed. There is the fruit of that seed.
Exactly.
So yeah, it has to be put in that place. Freedom, the freedom.
Okay, the freedom, I'm turning to that now, is a part of the second section of the book, which is focused all on the root system. You didn't pick which one, that's the next one. But the root system is something that many of us overlook, right? Like it's underground. We don't know that it is really something that matters. Like we know that a plant needs it, but we don't know that that we need it. And so in that story, I actually talk about when my husband and I built the first garden in our first home, and we had to remove the sod of the garden to kind of build it up. And we borrowed my grandfather's tiller, which, by the way, he's the only living grandparent I have left. And I have asked him to write a testimonial for the book, and he had, and I was in tears because I wanted him to know the fruits of his own labors. But when he came over to the house, my husband was planting tomato plants. And my grandpa goes, "Whoa, whoa, 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 I need to teach you something." My husband said, "What?" He goes, "Before you put the plant in the soil, I want you to loosen the soil and kind of activate the root system that like frees up the roots so the roots don't become root bound." And so this particular chapter talks about like we didn't cut off the roots, but when we go to try something new, when we go and we pivot to new things, it's important for us to do that, because if we don't, we will be like a house plant that I've probably got a couple of them around the house that become root bound. They can't grow anymore. Growth is stifled because the roots for the top of the plant to grow big, the roots of the bottom
need freedom. Yes.
They need the freedom.
Wow. Lesson, moral, principles, values, worth.
Yeah.
Part 3, the rocks.
Oh, I'm hopeful that this is something I'm pulling it over. The rocks. Okay, so we can talk about the rocks, but would you be down if I talk about the mountains?
Go right ahead. Right ahead.
So part 3 is on the breakthrough. And the reason I mentioned the mountains is because this story, I remember when I wrote it and I felt God in every moment. But the breakthrough is an overlooked part of growth, right? We think of the growth when the plant is, or when we have a big bloom, when like a major accomplishment happens. We don't always celebrate the moment that we have broken through the soil, even when we're still really little. In the chapter on the rocks, I talk about my daughter who actually would carry rocks around as like something she loved. And I love that chapter. But the next chapter on the mountain talks about when I was in a really dark place. So for breakthrough to happen, you need the conditions to be right. This is where it's important, like manure and all that stuff is what activates a seed. A seed can lay dormant in your drawer for decades.
And it could just rot.
And it could rot.
Right.
but you need the right conditions. So I was having some tough times. And my husband could tell. So he took me hiking, which is my favorite place to ever go. And we went up in the mountains. And while we were hiking, it was sweaty and hot. And I remember writing in there, like I had needed water and the water was pouring from my pores. Like it was so hot. We get halfway up and my husband's like, take a break, take a break, take a break. And I'm like, no, I have to keep going, because the farther and the harder I walked, the louder my heartbeat was in my head. And the louder that heartbeat was, the more I could tune out the worries of my life. Right. And I started to realize that it was like like my heartbeat was creating a song, and it was like God working in this moment. And I finally stopped to get a drink of water, and tears are rolling down my eyes. And my husband goes, why are you crying? And I said, I finally get what our pastor said recently. He talked about this Navy SEAL who was being baptized, and he asked the pastor to hold him under for like 2 minutes. And the pastor was like, no, that's like a liability. I can't do that. And the Navy SEAL was like, but I have like lungs of steel. I can do this. And the pastor said, I mean, I'll hold you for a couple extra seconds. And so he said he was holding him under at baptism, and it was like a second too long. And he said, no, I can't do this. So he got him up. All was good. The Navy SEAL was happy. Well, afterwards, our pastor went to him and said, why did you want to be held under so long? Like, that's not normal. Like, what do you want to do? And he looked at him and he said, I have a lot to leave in the water. And in the chapter on the mountains, when I was crying, I looked at my husband and he said, why wouldn't you stop? And I said, I have a lot to leave in the mountains. And I realized that we get the ability to be recommitted, to nourish our roots, to make sure we have the right conditions when we spend time with him. And that's where the conditions help for the breakthrough. Now, the breakthrough might feel like a really hard moment of life. That hike was a really rough spot in my life. And yet I know that the moment I had that, I understood so much more about how we don't have to hold it alone. That's that right. The trees and the fresh air and the Holy Spirit was helping me through all of that. And it can help any of us.
I love the point that you made, stating that the conditions must be right. Yep. That dark place is going to come, but the conditions must be right. You'll shoot through, you'll get to the mountain. I also like the fact, I don't know if it was on this point or the prior point, previous point, where you said sometimes we wait to bloom, we wait for full growth to celebrate, but just breaking through the soil, breaking through all those barriers, breaking through the darkness and seeing light again is worth celebrating. We don't have to wait for our branches to be weighted down with fruit. No. And the flowers to be fully bloomed, just breaking through the soil. I hope someone is listening to me today who is in a dark place, just breaking through the soil and knowing that that dark place is worth being into, because that's where development takes place. Yep. Some people may not know this because of the age we live in, but there was a time when we used to take pictures and they had to be developed.
Yes, right? I remember those.
Yes, we didn't have cell phones where we get them instantly. You had to take them to Kodak, yes, or what that other place was called. Yep. I was doing ministry at the time, and we took hundreds of pictures. So I spent a lot of money at those places. My goodness, look how much money we're saving now. Oh. But even though we pay $1 zillion for our cell phones, but still, if you know how to use it, you can get your money back. Those pictures those negatives go into a dark place to be developed. And if they are removed from that dark place prematurely, you get nothing or a blurred picture. Let's not despise the dark place. Yeah. Stephanie started out by saying she liked uncomfortable. I knew that sounds strange to some people, but it's a person who has gone through, or a person who's maturing or matured in the Lord, to know the worth of the dark places, of the discomfort, of the uncomfortable places, because it's a process. There's promise, there's process, and there's product. The process is never pleasant. Pure gold has to go in fire. Scripture
Yeah.
says it. You got to go in fire to get the pure gold. So let's not despise the dark places. And a lot of principles are being mentioned here. The seed is important. The dark place is important. Just breaking through the soil is important. We don't have to wait for full bloom.
No, you don't. You don't.
Not at all. And there's a purpose.
There
There's
is.
always let's not defy that. Let's not mess it up. Let's not go ahead of him and try to sort things out and handle things our own way. There's always a bigger purpose.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about trusting. And I
that's
think
the word.
That's the word. When I got laid off from the corporate job, I mean, they laid off 600 people that round.
That's a big company then.
It was. And that process reminded me that what I think the outcome is and what his plan is are not always in alignment. They're usually not. And I would not be where I'm at today. I would never have published the book. I would never have my first book, now 4. I wouldn't help people. I wouldn't be as close to him. Like there's so much about life that wouldn't have happened. If that
I mean, I could share an unpleasant situation that got me where I am as well. But the word she mentioned, he trust him. His thoughts towards us are good. He has an expected end, a hope, future. We say it all the time. Jeremiah 29:11. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. We say it all the time. No good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. So if you know you're doing your part as much as you submit to him, you can claim these promises.
Yep. You can. And I think the more that I sit in those dark places, the more I am actually uncomfortable in comfort. Because when I get comfortable, what I notice that what happens is the worldly worries are the things of my focus. Greed,
creeping
pride,
in.
Creep in. I don't like that. So I like to push myself to be uncomfortable.
That's a very interesting perspective. I'm going to use another word. It's a very mature perspective.
Thank you.
Honestly. I've gone through something before. Very, 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 very painful, very bad. And a friend of mine, I said to her, I would go through it again in a heartbeat. She said, Rosemary, you're crazy. Because she saw what I went through. I said, for all I get from this, the growth I get from this, I'll go through it again. It was like, the springboard you jump up on over the swimming pool.
Yes.
Just, once you spring
like
up,
the diving board. Boop.
Yeah, it just pushes you ahead, catapults you. That was what that experience did to me in my walk with the Lord. So yeah, I would go through the pain again because the benefits of it was worth more than the painful process. Yeah, our pain will empower us, put power in us to pour into people. We must remember that. Toolkit, the toolkit.
Oh, the toolkit. Okay, so the toolkit is a part of the chapter on the growth. So again, we focus on the bloom, but we don't focus on the daily, like we forget to focus on the daily movement to get to the thing that really kind of helps us explode and beautiful things come from it.
The caring, the day-to-day mundane things, the getting through from one day to the next. Is that what I'm hearing?
It is. It is. Now, what part of the growth is not always the beautiful part. And in fact, the you probably don't even know that this chapter that you selected is actually about a time that my son and I were drowning. We live on a 25 acre farm, and before we built our home, in the back of the property, we have a creek that probably comes up to my knees. My son was about 3 and would love to skip on all the rocks around it and around the creek. And we had a bonfire. We had no house here. We just would have our friends over and we go hiking in the creek and look at crawdads and jump on rocks and whatever. And so my husband was tending to the fire in the front of the property. And I was taking a group of about 15 or so family, our friends and kids back to the creek to play. And the next thing I know is I looked up and my littlest had slipped on a rock and fell in the water. And I was waiting for him to stand up, but he wasn't. Instead he was rolling like a log rolls down a moving creek in this spot. And I kept waiting. I mean, this waiting felt like eternity, but it was really, really brief time frame. And very quickly I realized he wasn't coming up. And so I went to jump in to get him. In my clothes, it was cold. It was like in the November, probably October, November time frame. And what I learned is underneath the water was kind of like quicksand and mossy rocks. So as he tried to stand up, he was slipping.
Wow.
So I tried to get him, but what I was trying to get up, I ended up slipping and falling on top of him. So I was actually making it worse.
My goodness.
Yeah, this is like a time in my life that I don't want to remember. However, what I learned from that process and from the experiences, there were people around me, and those people were watching and thought that what was happening was not what was happening, until finally I realized the power of my breath. And I could have held my breath as I would try to get up and fall down, or I could choose to use it to hopefully help somebody realize that even though we were in shallow water, my son and I were not going to make it. And so I opted for that, and I yelled help. And one guy, all he had to do was walk a couple steps in and grab us. And he got us to safety. Now, I can't, like, it's hard for me to move past that. I still remember it like it was yesterday. But as a part of our growth, I realized we need to rely on others and ask for help. Without that, my husband in the front of the property would have never known what was happening in the back of the property. He was caring to the land. He was being hospitable. He was creating an environment of warmth. And yet on the other side of the 25 acres, half of his family was struggling. So I've learned in my hardships, for growth to happen, it can't always be done alone. At that moment when I thought that I am his mom, I can fix this. I couldn't.
Another principle.
Another principle.
Yeah.
And the friend saved us.
Yes, because if we try to do it ourselves, we're going to go further under. So we don't have time to review the many principles that came up. We're going to stop with the subtopics there, but you can see how packed the book is with principles, using the analogy of the seed to a plant and how it applies to our lives. So what is your goal for readers? What do you want them to take away? Just in a nutshell, what you poured into this book, you've shared, because you can easily talk about the book. We see that it's in you, it pours out of you. And when we minister, be it verbally, vocally, or in written form, we want to see shifts. We want to see change. What do you want your readers to experience from this book or take away?
If everyone who reads it, or even one person who reads it, walks away feeling like they have the power and the ability to grow wherever they grow, from wherever they are planted, and to make room to bloom. Like, if they just embrace that, it will be a win. Because because the end goal, it's life, our end goal is not the end, it's the journey to get there. We make the change in ourselves. I mean, the end is the goal, don't get me wrong. As Christians, we got a better place coming, friends. But while we're here, it is our journey. It is the dash between the dates of when we were born and when we will be born again. And I hope that the goal here is that we all have the possibility to emerge and to reach out our hand and pull someone else while they're working to get
beautiful. So one last thing I'm going to ask you to do, Stephanie. I want you to talk to the person who is now in a dark place, but don't have this perspective. They think it's over. There's no way I can break through the soil. There's no way I will see light again. Talk to that person.
I've been there. I've been deep in my war room with me and God and Satan on the other side trying to fight for me. I know what it feels like to be there and to be in the dark spot, but I want you to realize that the manure that you're in has the power to change you, to prepare you, and to connect you. It does that to the soil. It literally changes the pH balances of the soil.
Come on.
It does all of that. It changes so that growth can happen. Do not see this moment as something that will stop you. Take a deep breath and remind yourself. These are the 3 things that got me out of my dark spot when I was in my war room. And that is the belief that I want to get well. It is the acceptance that there is help around me. And it is the reminder that For me to pollinate, I need to be around others who want to pollinate me. So select
Beautiful.
people in your area.
So
And
beautiful.
thank you.
Belief.
Yeah.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
Our relationship, was it? Reminder that there are the connection, that there are other people around you.
People want to help you. No, but
Yes.
there are hands who have been in, who have their nails, their nail beds are covered in dirt because they just grasped and clawed out from it, who are reaching out, ready to hold your hand and pull you through it. You do not have to be alone.
And it is the plan of the enemy to deceive us, to believe that we're all by ourselves and no one wants to help us.
Yes, not true.
Stephanie, this is powerful. This is beautiful. This is a sermon. This is a message. This is a lifter of the head. This is encouraging. This is from the throne of grace. We thank you so much for your work and putting this resource together for believers and unbelievers alike. I want you to tell the listeners one more time where they can get the books or book, and then we will go off.
Sounds great. If you visit stephaniefeger.com, and that's F as in Frank, EGER.com, you'll be able to learn all about my books and my newest one, Emergence. It's also available on Amazon and other locations that you go to purchase books at. So I would be honored for you to pick up the book, for you to let the messages inspire you, and for you to use it as a pollination to inspire and change other people. We got this.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Now, listeners, thank you for joining me on this wonderful, power-packed, very informative episode of All Things Faith Walk. If you are not a subscriber, go to All Things Faith Walk on YouTube, or you can find me at Books by Rosemary on Instagram and Facebook. My website is booksbyrosemary.com. And I also have books there that you can check out and see what can edify you. Like it, share it, forward it to someone, get the word out. There's hope. There is hope. That dark place is not a permanent place to be. There is hope. So thanks again for joining us, and the Lord bless you. Keep you until next time.